if everybody's good with that, so we'll call this meeting to order. And I want to thank you all for your participation because this is an extremely important meeting. Tracy, can you confirm a quorum for us?
Yes, sir, there is a quorum and the press has been notified. And if I may, just for housekeeping, since we have a few new proxies for the meeting, when there is a vote, your video does need to be on. And also when you make a motion or a second, if you can say your name before, so we make sure we get the right first and second motions. That's it. Thank you.
And so we want to welcome Bobby Aldridge as proxy for Secretary Hayes and Matt Stevens as proxy for Commissioner King. So, the next item of business is the consideration and approval of the minutes of the meeting held February 25th. I hope everyone has had an opportunity to review those minutes. Does anyone have any questions or corrections to the minutes from February 25th? If not, I'll entertain a motion that they be approved.
This is George. I'll make that motion.
Okay, thank you.
BG, I'll second. I'll second.
Okay, so we have a motion and we have a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, like sign. Motion carried. So the next item is the report and action and recommendations of the pension committee, which I'm going to give that report as chair of the pension committee. And so today, this is one of the most important decisions this board has to make. And I've asked the staff to provide me some background information on the process that's taken place as I came on the board in December. And so the ad hoc pension committee of the board of directors of Kentucky Housing Corporation, as I understand it, was appointed in February 2020 to investigate and receive information from the Kentucky Housing Corporation executive management, outside actuaries, and outside legal counsel regarding the possible cessation of KHC's participation in the Kentucky Employees Retirement System. The committee was tasked with focusing in detail on this very important decision. The first meeting by the committee was held on March 5th, 2020, a year ago in the KHC boardroom. The committee at that time was provided information about the decision facing this board and an overview of the options from which the board would choose. In addition to the members of the committee and the executive management of Kentucky Housing Corporation, there were representatives of Kavanaugh McDonald Consulting, LLC, an actuarial firm, and McBrayer P. LLC, outside legal counsel, were in attendance and have provided the information to the committee regarding the actuarial study required as part of the decision-making process and the requirement of creating an alternative pension plan if the decision was to be cessation of participation in KERS respectively. So following this meeting, COVID-19 hit. The global pandemic occurred, and the Kentucky General Assembly enacted legislation that moved the decision deadline from last April to this April. So we have only just over 30 days till that deadline. So today's the day we have to make a decision on this in order for all the documents and those kind of things to be delivered to KERS. So the committee started then a meeting virtually. And on January 28th, 2021, at this meeting, the committee received a refresh of the information provided at the first meeting. Again, representatives of Kavanaugh McDonald Consulting, LLC, and McBrayer P. LLC were in attendance and were able to answer questions from the committee. Committee then met virtually on February 22nd, 2021 and March 18th, 2021. At each of these meetings, the committee heard a presentation from Jim Statler and other members of the executive management of KHC. Again, representatives of Kavanaugh McDonald Consulting, LLC and McBrayer PLLC were in attendance at each meeting to answer questions. So at those meetings, the committee received detailed information for each option available to Kentucky Housing Corporation regarding possibly ceasing participation in KERS. This information included without limitation the estimated cost of each option, the effects each option would have upon KHC's ability to fulfill its mission to the Commonwealth and the citizens of the Commonwealth, and the effects each option would have on employees. Also discussed and presented were options for mitigating the effects on employees if Kentucky Housing ceases participation in KERS. And just want to mention that the committee and certainly this board values each and every employee at KHC. And so the consideration of the effect on employees was and will be a very important consideration. Let me say personally that I have been so very impressed with the people at KHC since I've been on board in December. I mean, it's unbelievable the job that they do and the professionals that they are. I've always been impressed with KHC, but I'm so more impressed with them as time goes on. And I've had a situation or two where I've reached out for help for this community, and they've really come through for me. So I certainly appreciate that. So with that, basically, those are my comments in regard to the process here. Mr. Miller, I would turn it over to you to see if you have any comments you would like to make at this point.
I do have a few comments, Chairman, and then I'll turn the presentation over to Jim Statler. Let me start by saying I first joined the Kentucky Housing Corporation Board in January of 2020 as the proxy for Secretary Johnson. At that time, the pension issue was front and center before the management team of Kentucky Housing Corporation. It was apparent to me that the management team had already been deeply engaged in analyzing the available options, studying the financial implications of those options, and working with all of the employees of Kentucky Housing Corporation to understand the impact of the various options on those employees and attempting to prepare the employees accordingly. That activity continued, as you've delineated, Chairman Denham, continued until the legislature granted a postponement of that decision until this year. On November the 16th of 2020, I became the executive director of the Kentucky Housing Corporation, thanks to you all that are here today, and I appreciate that. And at that time, it was no surprise to me that the management team was continuing to look at the data and to examine all the options and continuing the process of working with employees to ascertain the impact and to mitigate those impacts. That process has continued, and in working with the pension committee of the board, the management team has recommended to the pension committee and is now recommending to the full board that the Kentucky Housing Corporation exit under the plan that has generally been called the hard freeze. The basis for that recommendation has been presented to the pension committee and has been provided in writing to the full board in the materials that have been recently provided to the full board, as well as been previously briefed, but they will be presented in detail to you today by Jim Statler. I am convinced that this action is in the best interest of Kentucky Housing Corporation and its mission of providing fair and affordable housing to Kentuckians. I will not now repeat what Jim will cover with you in a few minutes, but we will stand and be pleased to discuss any questions you have following Jim's presentation. Jim, are you ready to proceed?
Yes, sir.
Proceed. Take it away.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Big decision today, and hopefully by the time I get through with going through the PowerPoint, we'll be sufficiently informed to go ahead and make that decision. I want to start off with some concerns. This PowerPoint should have been received by you electronically late yesterday afternoon or early evening. I'm going to read most of it. It's easier to read it than it is to ad lib on some of this stuff. I want to make sure that I say it right and that I cover everything that I really need to cover. Please interrupt and ask questions if anything is unclear, or I'm not explaining something right, or you just need some clarification on something. So and please do. I'm going to start right off here. In 2019, for every dollar of employee salary, KRS required participating quasi-state agencies like Kentucky Housing to contribute almost 50 cents to the retirement system. For a $50,000 employee hired that year, KHC would pay another almost $25,000 annually to support that employee's future retirement. The KRS contribution rate has steadily increased in response to a realization that the system was severely underfunded at great risk to ongoing performance. In 2000, Kentucky Housing paid only $2,900 in annual retirement contribution for that same $50,000 salaried employee. However, we began to see the General Assembly approve notable increases in required annual contributions. In 2016, KHC began experiencing direct impacts of the increasing contribution rates. It was increasingly difficult to recruit and hire skilled, experienced, knowledgeable staff at competitive salaries. When hiring a $50,000 employee in 2019, that employee would cost the corporation almost $75,000 in annual salary and retirement benefits, even before other benefits were added to the annual price for a position. Additionally, salary increases for existing staff were not financially feasible to the added increase in retirement benefits. In addition to impacts on recruiting and hiring and compression of existing staff salaries, the increasing cost and pension potentially impacts KHC's mission to provide safe, affordable, fair housing. The increased financial burden of remaining in KRS was recognized by the Kentucky General Assembly, who in response temporarily locked the annual contribution rate, then ultimately passed House Bill 1 or HB 1 in July of 2019. This bill provides a means for certain quasis like KHC to exit the retirement system. And so we did get a pay-in break. We did not go to the full amount that the rest of the participants in the KRS were paying, but still 49.47% is a pretty big slug. In August of 2019, Kentucky Housing began exploring its options to exit KRS, an expensive defined benefit plan for employees' retirements, in favor of a more financially feasible, employee-controlled defined contribution plan. In December of 2019, KHC paid KRS for a preliminary estimate of costs for each option, providing us figures that would allow for a financial analysis of the options for comparative purposes. The cost estimates were received in January of 2020, and KHC began consulting with an actuary to present a recommendation to the KHC Board of Directors to meet the April 30, 2020 deadline to exit KRS. While KHC management was reviewing options in February and March of 2020 in preparation of determining which option to recommend to the board, House Bill 171 was introduced in the General Assembly, which had the potential to impact KHC's decision. At that time, management added this possible option to its analysis. However, before a decision could be made, the pandemic became the priority of the General Assembly, which pushed the initial exit decision date of April 30 of 2020 a year out to April 30 of 2021. During this additional year, KHC remained in KRS and continued to pay into KRS at the rate of 49.47% of eligible payroll. Ultimately, HB 171 did not become law. A little bit on employee transparency. In anticipation of a possible exit from KRS, in early fall of 2019, KHC began an educational campaign for its employees called Know Your Tier, Know Your Benefits. This campaign included dedicated resources and information on KHC's internal website, weekly pension communication messages from management, as well as a $250 stipend for all employees to consult with a financial planner regarding their retirement options. And just a little bit of background, knowing your tier, the participants or our employees generally participate in KRS using in three very different tiers of benefit and vesting choices or vesting schedules. And so knowing your tier is very important at the employee level to understand what the actual benefit that they have is in play with the decision that we're making. Excuse me. Okay, I'm going to go back to the beginning just a little bit on some of the discussion and rationale that we went through as we compiled the comparative figures. Again, and then some of this is repetitive, but it continues, it puts the story in perspective. In July of 2019, when the General Assembly passed House Bill 1, allowing certain quasi-agencies to exit Kentucky retirement system, each quasi was presented with 5 options, 4 options to exit KRS and 1 option to remain a participant. For years leading up to the passage of HB 1, quasis, for various budget reasons, had been permitted to contribute to the retirement system at a pay-in annual contribution rate substantially lower than the bulk of the retirement plan members. HB 1 provided a one-time opportunity to exit the defined benefit plan in favor of a more financially feasible, employee-controlled defined contribution plan before the quasis were anticipated to begin paying the much higher pay-in rate. The 4 exit alternatives for consideration are essentially 2 alternatives: a hard freeze option and with 2 funding options, and a soft freeze option with 2 funding options, which we'll get into a little bit. The hard and soft freeze options have different benefit implications and calculation bases and financing mechanisms. And the KRS did a presentation to staff. It was back in spring or winter, I guess, of 2020, explaining the different impacts of the hard freeze on different tiers and the soft freeze on different tiers. The overall approach that we've used has been to examine the alternatives and settle on the option which management believes best ensures that KHC will have the resources and flexibility to fulfill its obligations of meeting the safe, affordable, and fair housing mission for years to come, mindfully that we have this one opportunity to make a decision to exit KRS. The basis for the analyses was a communication from KRS outlining the preliminary estimated cost of each option received by KHC, which we received in January of 2020. And I'm looking at the cessation cost column, which is the first column of figures on this chart. And the 4 options you can see down the margin is the options 1, 2, 3, and 4, obviously, and what they represent and what the estimated cessation costs of using either or any one of those options. So the hard freeze lump sum option was with the cessation costs in that preliminary calculation was $86 million and change. Option 2, which is the soft freeze lump sum pay-in, was $123 million. Okay, those lump sums are by June 30th of now 2022, we will have to pay in one check or one lump sum, a dollar amount, in this case on these preliminary numbers of either 86 on the hard freeze or 122 million on the soft freeze. Option 3 is the hard freeze payable in installments. And you see that the total cash outflow for that is about $14 million higher than paying in lump sum. That's effectively interest. If you're going to pay it over 30 years, you're going to pay a bunch of interest on top of it. And in this case, it's $14 million. In option 4, the soft freeze payable in installments, it only goes up by $12 million. And that's a function of some of the discounting and cost of the funds going forward, but it would still cost $134 million. And then obviously option 5, which is the election to stay in KRS, there is no cessation cost. I'm going to go to the third column now, if you will, and look at the discount rate used to calculate cessation costs. And I don't want to get into the weeds too much, but the higher the discount rate, the lower the present value of the future cash flows. And so the House Bill 1 was biased in its direction that it was pointing at, saying, if you do the hard freeze and you get out in a lump sum, we will discount the future cash flows and costs of providing those benefits by 4.5%. And the higher the discount rate, the lower the answer. By comparison, in option 2, the discount rate used was 3.5%. And so it has a higher cessation cost for 2 reasons. One is the fact that it has a lower discount rate. And the second is the benefits that you're buying in the soft freeze are more benefits. And so the difference between the option 1 and 2, between the 86 and the 122, has 2 incremental components that get you from the lower option 1 to the higher option 2. Then the option 3 hard says we're going to take the same numbers we got in option 1 hard freeze lump, and instead of discounting them 4.5%, we're only going to discount them by 3.5%. That it makes the liability higher, and then in addition to that, there'll be interest to pay via the installments. And then similarly, on option 4 soft freeze installments, the discount rate was 3%, making it even higher. Now the embedded discount rate in the KRS plan is 5.25%, and so there's already a slight pay-in penalty when we are looking at the cessation freezes and exits because of the changes in the discount rate. And actuaries really love this. Accountants kind of, and then I don't know if anybody else likes it or not. So it's and I've had several conversations with our actuaries, and one of them is on the line here, and so I'm jabbing just a little bit at the actuaries. Going along, management then, with assistance of our actuarial consultants, determined that the figures presented on the previous table were sufficiently adequate for a financial analysis of the options for comparative purposes. And that was the first thing I wanted to know. Are the numbers good? Not that I distrusted anybody. I just wanted to make sure that the numbers looked reasonable. And so we did use Kavanaugh McDonald to assist us in determining that, yes, from their knowledge of the plan and Kentucky Housing, the numbers made sense. It should be noted that these figures were derived from employee data as of June 30 of 2019, but that the final cost would be determined using data of June 30 of 2020. Those are the old dates on the original issuance of House Bill 1, and that obviously the June 30, 2020 date has been extended to June 30, 2021. Using this information, again, that's what's on the table, as a starting point, management ran analyses of cash flows using the provisions of each option. The costs of the exit options were essentially the present values of the amount necessary to pay off our portion of the plan's what is known as the unfunded actuarial accrued liability, or UAAL, calculated using those different discount rates under House Bill 1 that I just discussed. The cost of exiting under option 3, which is hard installment, were derived from actuarial data using a lower discount rate than option 1 hard freeze lump sum, and which was 3.5 versus 4.5, resulting in a higher present value starting point and essentially financed within KHC at their imputed interest rate of greater than 5.5%. For this reason, option 3 was dropped from consideration, because no matter how you work the numbers, you were going to end up paying more in overall dollars and also a higher present value cost of that exit. Similarly, option 4, which is the soft freeze installment payments method, was dropped since it too was based on a higher starting exit cost derived from the lower discount rates we previously discussed, and was financed again within the KRS at an imputed interest rate greater than 5.5%. That left us 3 options to consider: a hard freeze lump sum, a soft freeze lump sum, and remaining in KRS. In an initial review of the 3 options, the starting cost of the soft freeze lump sum was higher than the starting cost of the hard freeze, due again, as we discussed, to the different discount rates used in the calculations, and the benefit, the added benefits that were going to be payable by KRS. KRS and paying an annual contribution rate is what we had 9.47 to jump to if for some reason, or we decided to hang on. I've got a message here on my. Is everybody still here and see me?
Yes.
Okay. That we anticipate having to go to 93.01% instead of 49.47. It was at this point that everything was put on hold by the pandemic and all critical dates moved forward 1 year. So here we go again. In late 2020, 4 or 5 months ago, as management was restarting its review, we were informed by KRS that we would not be getting updated employee cost information from them to form an informed decision in April of 2021. Our decision would have to be based on the figures we received in January of 2020, which again were the June 30, 2019 actuarial data. Although the final exit cost now would be based on a June 30, 2021 actuarial data. Again, we consulted with our actuaries and we determined that we could roll forward the figures and numbers in a reasonable fashion to still make an informed decision of whether to exit or stay in the plan. We were really humming along, and then a fourth option appeared, House Bill 8. In March of 2021, as KHC was preparing options to present to the board, the General Assembly passed House Bill 8, a bill essentially identical to the old House Bill 171 that I mentioned that was on the table back in 2020. And since this particular slide was written, the governor, it's my understanding, has signed House Bill 8, so it's becoming law. HB 8 cures several of KHC's ongoing complaints concerning the method by which KRS has historically charged employers for the repayment of the unfunded actuarial accrued liability. Historically, this was charged based on each employer's payroll for the then current actuarial period. This resulted in many employers shifting payroll off their books, resulting in significant savings to the employer at the expense of those employers whose payroll remained stable. House Bill 8 eliminates the incentive for employers to take advantage of this payroll reduction technique. In addition, the calculation of each employer's UAAL under House Bill 8 is at the KRS discount rate, 5.25% instead of the 4.5% in the hard freeze lump sum, not a reduced rate as was used in the HB1 calculation, essentially reducing KHC's share of the UAAL compared to the HB1 calculations. On the negative side of HB 8, KHC would remain in the Kentucky retirement system plan, exposing the corporation to possible future increases in the ongoing UAAL, though that there's also the possibility of decreases as well. HB 8 exposes employers to increases in the UAAL, whereas HB1 exit options expressly forbid our replacement plan from having the possibility of an unfunded actuarial liability. So it's kind of contradictory. It's okay if you stay that you're exposed to the unfunded liability, but if you're going to set out on your own plan, you're not allowed to have a plan that can have that as a possibility. These changes could result from actuarial assumption changes, worse or better investment performance, funding shortages at the plan level, or statutory changes, all of which would be out of Kentucky Housing Corporation's control. The upshot of these possible changes in the UAAL, based on management's discussion, this time with KRS's actuaries, is that KHC would not actually have a fixed amortizable debt, which could be reduced with extra principal payments against the balance. KHC would therefore be subject to the imputed interest rate in the KRS plan of approximately 5.5% for 30 years, with no means of refinancing at a lower rate outside the plan, an ability KHC does have under an HB1 exit scenario. And so we would be stuck with, and I had this conversation with the KRS's actuaries and said, now wait, let me make sure I understand this because it's important. We've got this lump sum that you've identified that we owe, which is the UAAL, and then we'll have this ongoing normal service cost. But that lump sum number can change, and I can't pay it down, and it can still change. It can go up and down, and I'll be responsible for any up and down. Or if for some reason the funding rate on the plan miraculously drops, the pay-in rate by statute changes down to 50, and even though 50 cents on the dollar, even though 50 cents on the dollar isn't enough to keep the UAAL from being defeased, I don't have any control over that, and I can't pay it off and be done with it and finance it outside. And they said, no, you're stuck. You're stuck. They didn't say we're stuck, but the mechanism of defeasing that UAAL within the plan, if you stay in under House Bill 8, is that you do not have the options that are available to you if you were to decide to try to exit and finance, if you will, the UAAL outside of the plan. A little bit about some of the financial analyses that we did. We basically took the different options and analyzed cash flows by projecting 30 years of cash flows and costs under each of the options available. And the reason 30 years is that's the amortization period. I think it's actually 29 now of how internal to the plan the UAAL is going to be defeased. And so if the pay-in rate under House Bill 8 is this amount, then we have to have comparative cash flows for the same amount of period so that we know what the cumulative out-of-pocket is over the 30 years, and then we have a basis for discounting it back into present values. Staying in KRS without passage of HB 8, as stated, would be cost prohibitive. And it's my understanding that HB 8 it eliminates the old way of participating in KRS, but clearly staying in under the old rules at 93 cents on the dollar. HB 8, the pay-in rate's about 65 or 66 cents on the dollar versus the 50. It's still higher than what we've been paying, but anything without HB 8 and staying in would be cost prohibitive. The analyses were subjected to salary inflation and increases in headcount, and it was determined that remaining in KRS via HB 8 with its higher ongoing contribution rate or normal service costs would result in higher overall costs than the lower contribution rates assumed in either of the freeze options with a KHC-sponsored defined contribution plan. We explored the impact of the possible loss of administrative fees due to lower future period pension costs available to charge to programs, and determined that while there is some impact, the loss of admin fees does not overcome the advantages of either of the freeze options. There's also concern at the management level that the federal programs in the future may limit the amount of pension costs eligible to be charged back to the program cost, even though a participant may actually be paying a higher pension cost than what that limited amount that the programs would allow. The costs of maintaining and contributing to a replacement plan were considered. Despite the use of a higher discount rate and KHC census information, in other words, under House Bill 8, they looked at just our employees, past and present, who are drawing pensions or not drawing but have left or are currently employed, and making these calculations under HB 8, the present value cost still came in higher than the hard freeze lump sum, and the pay-in cost measured in future dollars, in other words, the ongoing pension burden on each future year's budget of KHC, was extremely high compared with the future dollar cost of the hard freeze lump sum option. Conclusion and recommendation. Based on all the factors considered, management determined that for KHC to continue to have the ability and resources to deliver safe, affordable, fair housing to the citizens of the Commonwealth, a hard freeze lump sum option would be best enable KHC to do so. Staying in KRS was determined to continue to expose the corporation to potentially negative plan performance while maintaining mandatory benefit obligations, and would deprive KHC of the ability and those resources necessary to deliver our mission. By remaining in KRS, KHC would be held captive by KRS's benefit structure, performance risk, and the required employee contribution mandate, which management feels is less competitive than comparable voluntary contribution plans prevalent in the private sector from which we recruit. Recommendation. Absent any adequate financial incentive to remain in KRS, despite House Bill 8, there remained only the exit options. KHC management therefore recommends taking advantage of this one-time opportunity to exit KRS as the best strategic option for KHC. Additionally, due to the significantly higher cost of exiting under the soft freeze lump sum option, management further recommends the KHC exit under the hard freeze lump sum option.
Thank you, Jim.
Sure.
I just want to say I appreciate your hard work and executive management's hard work. I know this has been a really hard job to do, and I appreciate your effort. Mr. Miller, do you have any other comments you want to make at this point?
I think there are a couple of slides there that Jim may wish to cover that have not been covered on the cost comparison and then the implementation, but perhaps the thought was just to hold those to later. Jim, what's your plan in that regard?
Oh, I'd rather continue and finish everything I have to say.
Okay.
If that's agreeable to everybody.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt, Jim. I thought you were finished. I apologize.
It did, and in your defense, sir, it did sound like I was done, but there's a couple more things here. The cost comparison, and there's a table, a couple slides on, but and it's referenced as attached because this is a written report that we're going to have. Attached is a chart comparing representative cash flows of the four options considered. The primary objective of being able to better control KHC's costs and allow an ability to deliver our mission was considered feasible only by using, again, an exit strategy and leaving the hard freeze or soft freeze. A cost comparison of the two freeze options shows a difference in overall cost of the hard freeze. And there, in the cost comparison chart, you can see that. Of the different costs that are involved. And reading across the top set of figures, and again, the four options we're comparing here are KRS, no HB8, which is obsolete now because HB8 was passed, but it's interesting to see how much more it would cost if HB8 had not been passed. Then the KERS, staying with KERS with HB8, then the soft freeze, and then the hard freeze. And the soft freeze and hard freeze figures are lump sum, having excluded the installment payment streams as being even much more costly. And you can see that the hard freeze, and this is these are comparative numbers of budgetary impact in future dollars in each of the 30 years, added up to see what the total cost of exiting under the hard and soft freeze are and staying in with HB8. And so you can see that the total dollars that we would be expected to pay in to a replacement plan plus the dollars to exit KRS would be $109 million in the hard freeze. The soft freeze is $149 million. KERS with HB8, $194 million. So clearly, if you look down the hard freeze column, it is $40 million less costly, if you will, than the soft freeze, $85 million less costly than the KERS with HB8, and $176 million less costly than the old rule, which of course has been supplanted by HB8. For in my opinion, a better comparative comparison, we then took all those future cash flows and discounted them back to present value. And you can see that again, the hard freeze is the lowest amount at $97 million. The soft freeze, which was second in gross dollars, but turns out to be third in present value, is $131 million. And HB8 is $119 million. And the reason that HB8 actually overtakes soft freeze in the present value is that so much of the cost in HB8 is pushed out and so far out into the 30-year period. By the time you discount it back to present value, it's a lower number than the shorter period over which the soft freeze future payments are actually going to be discounted. But the answer essentially is the same, and that is that in the present value scenario, hard freeze of $97 million compares most favorably, but still $22 million less costly than the present value cost of remaining in KERS with HB8. And so this was a very short analysis of the numerics. There's reams of spreadsheets behind all this and notes and stuff, but this tries to boil it down to this is why the provisions of a defined contribution plan we feel are superior to being locked into the more restrictive defined benefit plan at KERS, and then supported by the actual cost figures. This is why management is recommending the hard freeze lump sum. Then one final comment, then I will conclude on the implementation. We are in the process of there we go. Thank you. We are in the process of finalizing the defined contribution plan. In fact, I think the bulk of it is up for discussion after I'm done here. We're doing that in partnership with the Kentucky Deferred Compensation Group, and to have this plan in place and submitted to KRS is a requirement of exiting KRS. So this has to be signed, sealed, and delivered and ready to go by April 30th. We are accumulating additional necessary documentation required to submit a full application in anticipation of the exit election at the board. All the required paperwork, again, regarding the decision and required by House Bill 1 must be submitted to KRS by April 30th of 2021. We can wait to the very last minute because they're just across the street, but we wanted the decision made to give us ample time, obviously, to get all of the documentation put together. And we are not going to wait till April 30th. Management has remained mindful and sensitive throughout this decision-making process of the potential impacts of this decision on individual employees. These impacts vary greatly depending primarily on hire date, years of service, for vesting and eligibility thresholds. We are committed to and are developing plans to reduce the impact of employee transitions and retirements to the extent financially feasible in order to ensure business continuity. And I want to make one additional comment. Clearly, at the conclusion of the meeting last week of the pension committee, the recommendation was became known to our workforce and our employees. We've had feedback from our employees, and I want to say this, and I mean it unequivocally, that the professionalism, the maturity, and respectfulness that we have received, even though the decision is a very hard decision to accept by our employees, has just been astounding. And it's exactly what I would have expected from our workforce, and it's exactly what we've heard. And so, kudos to our folks in how they've responded to obviously what's been a very difficult decision. That concludes my remarks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Jim. And I think your professionalism always shows. So, Mr. Miller, I would go back to you. Do you have any further comments you would like to make at this point?
I do not, but we stand ready to respond to any questions or engage in any discussion with the members of the board. We appreciate the vote of the pension committee of the board to recommend this action to the full board. And we appreciate the time of all of the board members in consideration of this action today. And we appreciate that. So I believe that the matter is before you for further discussion and action if you deem it warranted.
Okay, so let me open it up to any questions that board members might have, and also any comments any of the pension committee members may have in addition to the comments I've had. And we have not only executive management team here to answer your questions, but we do have Kavanaugh McDonald Consulting LLC and McBrayer P LLC in attendance to answer any questions. So I'll throw it open. Do we have any questions? So Jim, one question I have, if you decided to stay with KRS, it would be about $9.1 million a year, and that would, in over 30 years, and that would continue to go up. Is that correct? And in over 30 years, it would be something like $278 million.
Hang on a second. Let me get my.
Or 273 million.
Yeah, these are comparative costs that I've got on here. That sounds right, sir. Okay. Hang on just a sec. I believe that's correct. When you add up the total dollars that are going to be paid in, and it would be that much. That's correct.
Okay.
I just would like to clarify that the reliable numbers are old numbers, and we don't actually have the brand new numbers, but the old numbers give us a very good comparison from which we can make a decision. Is that not right, Jim?
Yes, that's correct. And again, I've used the word comparative a number of times because as things impact, should the final number be a little bit smaller or bigger than the numbers we've been working with, it would be essentially the same up and down in relationship to the other cash flows that we've been able to determine. And so it's not it's a function of our workforce, which has not changed demonstrably since 2019, and the way the actuarial numbers work is the numbers anticipate future pay-ins based on where things were on in June of 2019. And so the numbers might be different in June of 2020 when they actually, or 2021 when they actually do the calculations. But relative to the other options, they'll all either go up proportionally or down proportionally.
Excellent question. Anyone else?
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, just a reminder before the vote, all members need to have their video on. Thank you.
Is mine on, Tracy?
No, it is not.
How did I do that?
Down at the bottom left corner, you should have your audio and video capabilities.
How about now?
You are on. Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. Sorry about that.
And we need Mayor Burton and George C.
There's a little camera there next to my mute button, but it's not blocked out.
Huh.
I think you were sharing it, but I'm not sure your camera was. Do you have anything that covers your camera potentially?
I got it. Let's.
You're
Still
sharing,
don't.
George, but you're still black. I mean, their screen's still black.
There it is.
There it is.
I did it. Okay.
And Mayor Chester Burton still needs her video on. There we go. Okay, I think we have everybody. Thank you.
So we're ready to go. Okay, so following the presentation from the Executive Committee and their recommendation at the March 18th meeting, the committee voted unanimously to recommend to the Board of Directors the adoption of a resolution approving the Executive Management's recommendation to cease participation in KERS. So at this point, I would entertain a motion to accept the committee's recommendation.
I will make a motion that we accept Executive Management's recommendation to cease participation in KERS.
This is Barry. I'll second that.
Okay, so thank you for the motion and the second. So does anyone have any further questions or comments they would like to make before we take the vote? Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion is carried. So once again, I want to thank the executive management team and the staff for the hard work they've done on this issue. I know it's been a tough issue for a number of years, and I want to thank the professionalism of the KHC employees and their hard work and their effort to make KHC what it is today. So now, as I understand it, in order to make this work, we have to have some kind of plan, retirement plan for our employees for the future from April 30th on. And so to explain that, I'm going to call on Mr. Ratliff to tell us about what their recommendation is.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize in advance to everyone for the horrible camera angle for me as I present, but when you're running the screens and presenting at the same time, it's not always convenient. So executive team has been working on creating this new pension plan in advance of the potential decision by the board for KHC to cease participation in KERS. I want to call everyone's attention to the fact that Alan Paw is in the meeting and present. Alan is an outside counsel to KHC through McBrayer PLLC, and he has been advising myself and the rest of the executive team as we've moved through this process on establishing a new defined contribution plan that is the primary focus of Alan's practice is in the area of pension plans. So the plan we are proposing to start off with is employee eligibility. So the employees at KHC who would be eligible are any employees are eligible when they are immediately upon starting employment, so long as they are not a temporary, a rented, a non-resident alien employee. Those are excluded. And any employee who does not average, and this number is actually different now after a conversation and some work that Alan and I did last night. This standard is not applicable for our plan. It's too stringent, actually. So we're going to ease this restriction and make more employees eligible. So it's not actually going to be at 100 hours per month over a calendar year. It's going to be less than 1,000 hours in a calendar year. Will make an employee eligible. And we're required to have it set at no more than 1,000. So what can go into the plan? As far as money from the employees, they can roll over money from an alternative pension plan into this plan. And it's a little bit complicated because there's actually two plans at play here. KHC already has a 401k plan established at Kentucky Deferred Comp in which its employees are eligible to participate if they so choose. KHC does not provide any match or any contributions to that plan, but the employee has the option of deferring income into a 401k plan at Deferred Comp. It already exists, and that's where any employee elective deferrals under this plan will continue to go. They will fund the 401k plan that already exists at Kentucky Deferred Comp. So we're going to have a bunch of employees who will likely, hopefully, all of our employees will be participating in this. But we have quite a few who don't currently participate in the 401k plan who will now begin to participate. So any deferrals from their salary will go into the 401k plan. KHC is establishing a 401a plan for the money that KHC would contribute for retirement for employees. And that is because KHC is prohibited by law. And if anyone wants the specifics about that, Alan's ready to provide the specifics. But we are prohibited by law from contributing money into the 401k plan. So we have to establish the other plan for our money to go into. All this information will be readily available to all employees. There is an online portal for the employees to access their account information, and in there they'll be able to see all of the money they've contributed as well as all the money that KHC has contributed into the 401a on their behalf. So the employer contributions, KHC would match 100% of contributions made by employees up to 4% of the employee's income. So if the employee elects to participate in the 401k and have money withheld from their paycheck pre-tax to go into the 401k plan, KHC will put the same amount of money into the 401a plan up to 4% of the employee's compensation. And in addition to that, KHC will have the ability to make discretionary contributions above and beyond that match into employees, into the 401a for employees. So in the for-profit world, this would be a profit-sharing plan where an employer, if they have a really good year and have a lot of profits that they want to share with their employees, they have the ability to put in a discretionary amount into the employee's pension account to share that good year with them. So if you think about it in terms of that, while KHC is not a for-profit entity, if we have a particularly good year financially, we can put money into the pension plan to reward our employees for that. So vesting, The executive management, wants to protect our current employees through this process. And we recognize that this is going to be a difficult process for many of them. And so when we create this new plan, we want everyone who is employed at KHC as of July 1, 2021, regardless of their years of service, to be 100% invested in the money that KHC contributes into the 401A plan for them. So an employee's money that goes into the 401k plan is always their money. All of that money is always there. That's coming out of their salary, out of their compensation into that plan. Typically, employers, when they contribute into a pension plan, they require a vesting of that money. And that is either a 5 or a 7 year vest, generally speaking. And that requires years of service by that employee to actually have that money that the employer contributes into the 401A plan be theirs. So if they leave without fully vesting, all of the 401A money would not be theirs. So if you're employed on July 1, anything we contribute in is yours. If you sever employment with KHC 2 months later, anything we have contributed at that point into the 401A is yours, and you can roll that money over into a new pension plan. You can keep it where it is, whatever you choose to do with it. Disability or death will vest the 401A 100% for the employee. So if the employee was to pass away while they were working at KHC, any money we had contributed in the 401A would be vested for their estate or their heirs. Similarly, if they become disabled and are no longer able to work, the 401A money would be protected for them, invested for them. If you are not employed, if you're a new hire after July 1, then you're going to be subject to a vesting schedule. It is a 5-year vesting schedule, and there are different options for how that can vest. There can be just a 5-year cliff. So if you work 4 years, 364 days, and you resign your position in a cliff vest, none of that money goes with you. You have to work that extra day to get your 5 years so that you can take that money with you. We have decided that we would do not a cliff vest, but once an employee has worked at KHC for 2 years, they will be 25% vested in the 401A. At 3 years, they will become 50%, 4 years, 75%, and 5 years, they'll be 100% vested in the money that's contributed into the 401A plan. So it's effectively, it's a pro rata vesting over a 4-year period that begins after you've completed 2 years of service. The investments that will be available will be a variety of funds. If anyone has a 401k or a 401k type plan or ever has had that in their career, you would probably recognize that there will be a variety of mutual funds that will be available, different types of investments that can be made with. There will be a good variety of investments that the employee may select from in order to have the money invested. And those choices will be up to the employee as to how their money is invested when it goes into the account. So that is the plan that we propose to put in place. Obviously, there's a lot of paper that's involved in that because there's lots of attorneys that are involved in these plans, and attorneys like to create paper. So one of the requirements of the statute in exiting from the KRS is that the plan has to be approved as a qualified plan by the IRS. This is the letter from the IRS that was issued to approve this particular plan as a qualified plan. The pension committee has had the benefit of me speaking about this potential plan for a while, and I've explained to them, and I now explain to the full board that by working with Kentucky Deferred Comp, one of the advantages of that is they have quote unquote canned plans. So they've got plans that have already been approved by the IRS that you can select from, and as long as you only do certain check the box elections with respect to that plan, it will automatically be a qualified plan because the IRS has already signed off on that. That is what we are proposing to use, is one of these quote unquote canned plans. And this is the letter from the IRS that approves the qualified plan status for this particular plan. You would have gotten in your mail out along with the package the boilerplate language for this plan. It's very lengthy. It's about a 50-page document. And that's not all the paper that's involved in the plan, but that is the plan itself in boilerplate form. There are some election sheets that go with that to, for example, establish the match is 4% and those other characteristics that I've shared with you today. So staff does recommend approval of adopting this plan. And there's a couple of reasons why. Number one, we have to have all this over to CURS on April 30th, and we need to be able to finalize it with Kentucky Deferred Comp and Nationwide in advance of sending it over to CURS. And in order to do that, we have to finalize the documents and have them signed off on. And Nationwide requires that we have a resolution from the board authorizing an officer of KHC to sign all those documents. So I have to have your approval of the plan and the authorization for, in this case, Winston, who as the executive director and CEO of KHC, to sign everything that needs to be signed to establish this plan with Nationwide in order to finalize that process with Nationwide and be able to get this over to CURS. And so at this time, that's the recommendation from staff. And if anyone has any questions, Alan or I will be happy to address those.
Jeremy, just let me ask a real quick question. Instead of 100 hours average per month, it's 1,000 hours over a year. Is that right?
It's actually going to be a little less than that. I was discussing that with Tammy Barble, who is the head of our HR this morning, and it's going to end up being a little less than 1,000. I believe what she said was 960 hours would be easier for our staff, and it aligns with some other requirements for other benefits that exist already. So she was saying that would be an easier standard for our staff and for our accounting department.
So, and they can, their 401k plan that they have now, the money that, the match money that they make is going to go into that plan, right? And they can still continue their deferral that they already have set up. Is that correct?
That's correct. Their deferrals will go into the 401k plan. And we have a number of employees now who already do that. They already make deferrals into there. They'll have the opportunity to change those elections if they wish. We may have someone who's only contributing 1 or 2%, and they find out that we'll match up to 4%. So they want to increase their contribution up to the 4%, and they enable them to get the full contribution from KHC that we will make with the 100% match.
And is the reason you all selected Nationwide, are they the ones that take care of all of those plans over at Deferred Comp?
Yes, sir. That they have the contract with Kentucky Deferred Comp to serve in that role.
Okay. All right. Okay. So any board members have any questions, please? Kathy?
Yeah. And this is something, and I plan to vote for this. So let me just preface anything I'm going to say. As you know, or the staff knows, I am very concerned about the extra largesse that might be contributed that might exclude the lowest paid people because they don't contribute to a 401k. And I'm assuming everybody works equally hard at KHC. And Mr. Peoples, I don't know what it's like in Lexington, but in Louisville, very frequently, the lowest paid jobs are the ones that Black employees are hired into, Latinx employees are hired into, female employees are hired into. So anything that pays out that could exclude particularly the lowest paid people, I have a problem with that. I'm voting for this, but I would love to put in a warning in the motion that any time that there's a contribution that something be done to ensure that every employee in some way, maybe not through the 401k, receives the benefit of the largesse of KHC. Otherwise, it's basically setting something up, especially given the racial mix of highest paid employees, most able to contribute, and the other employees at KHC right now. So again, I'm voting for it. I do wish we were paying the fees, but I know the fees will come out of the pool. But like I said, my greatest concern is that payments will be made and exclude some of the lowest paid people in the future.
Jeremy, you want to respond to that?
I can only say that we've discussed this with Ms. Hinko, and we are very aware of her concerns, and we are sensitive to those concerns. Again, our hope is that everyone will participate. That's our hope, and we will do all we can to encourage employees and follow up with employees who, for whatever reason, don't indicate that they wish to participate initially. We will have further conversations with them to make sure they fully understand the choice that they have and the ramifications of the choice that they seem to be making versus the other choice. We care a great deal about our staff at KHC. This has been a difficult choice because of the care that we have for our staff. And we know that this is impacting their lives in different ways. So we want to make this as equitable and as fair for everyone. They all will have the opportunity to sign up for this and to contribute to it and participate in it. And we really hope that every single one of them will. Ultimately, it's their choice. That's the way this plan is set up, and they have to make the choice for themselves. And they are adults who can make that choice for themselves. The best we can do is make sure they are fully informed in making that decision and follow up with them and make sure that they completely understand the choice that they're making when they make it. And hopefully they all sign up. That's what we want. We want everyone signed up so that they are all participating. We all care about them. We all want them to have financial security in retirement years. And that's our hope.
Mr. Chairman, this is Amy. As you know, I'm over employee services, which is our human resources. And Kathy and I spoke about this yesterday. But one of the things that my human resources staff do when an employee wants to not accept something that we know is very beneficial to them is that we will follow up with that person individually a couple of different times. So, this is a concern of ours. We want everyone to have this benefit going forward. It is very different from the one they've had before. So we want to make sure that they understand it. And then they understand the ramifications of later not having accepted that benefit now. So beginning next week, we're having meetings for staff with Kentucky Deferred Comp. They can attend one or they can attend every time if they'd like to be able to hear what the plan is, fully understand it. And then we have an assigned liaison for our staff that can work with them individually. If we hear that an individual is wanting to opt out, then we will work with them individually as well to make sure that they understand what they're opting out of. And honestly, I'd give them the same advice my dad gave me when I was in my early 20s. Amy, even if you can only put in $5 out of every paycheck, it's $5 out of every paycheck. Find a way to cut that from your budget. And I know that's not capable. Everyone's not capable of doing that, but those are the kind of things that we'll encourage staff to do. We'll have meetings again with Deferred Comp a little closer to July 1, so it won't be a one-shot meeting with them for the staff this next 2 weeks. We're just going to continue to communicate to the staff, which is really what we've done for the last year and a half. In 2019, when we wanted them to know their tier, we really launched that campaign, because if you don't know your tier in KRS, you're going to leave benefits on the table. You might not know what your options are. We have spoken with so many staff individually, and I can tell you that Jim Statler, my HR director, Tammy Varble, and myself could almost tell you by person where they are, what tier they are, what they're concerned about, what their vesting points are. We're going to be that, Kathy, I can promise you, we're going to be that diligent about their opting into this plan. Now, again, I can't make them do anything, but I told Kathy yesterday, you know, I will personally be responsible for that for you, because these are people that we care about and we want the best for. And we know this decision to move and transition retirement plans is not easily understandable for a lot of us. And some of us have had more options to look at these things than others over the last year. So I've committed to Kathy, and I'll commit to the board today, that my staff and I will do our due diligence to make sure we have as many of our staff in this plan as we possibly can. And I'm sure they're watching today, so hopefully they've heard this as well.
And let me be clear, I know you will. And I'm not talking about their choice. I'm talking about when KHC has a choice of how they will distribute money, will they choose to only distribute it to those employees in the 401k, some of whom will not be participating, or will they choose to share that in a different way? I'm talking about KHC's choice, not the person's choice. And that's all I can speak to is KHC's choice. So I'm just putting on alert that, you know, one of the ways when you distribute money, if it doesn't go to everyone, you better be aware of who it's not going to, so you don't have racial or sex or ethnic disparities. That's all.
Sure. I appreciate that. And we'll be watching for that as well, Kathy. When we've done our compensation reviews, our external consultant made it clear to us a few years ago that we were actually investing more in our lower paid staff than we were in our higher paid staff. And we didn't realize that at all. We thought the opposite was the case. So when we looked at our compensation structure the last couple of times, and we're recently looking at it again in the last year and a half, I mean, those things tend to pan out. You tend to want to distribute at Kentucky Housing those kind of increases to your lower paid staff, because their salaries don't look right, when you look at your own salary or some of the staff around you. So I can tell you that that's the kind of corporation that we've tried to be, and we are continuing to try and be that corporation. So I hope that reassures you, but I know that you're on the board going forward and you'll be watching for that, and we'll try our best not to disappoint you.
Thank you, Amy and Jeremy, for your response, and Kathy, thank you for your question. Your point's very well taken. Any other board members? Okay, so if there are no other questions or comments, I would entertain a motion to accept this defined contribution plan in Resolution 13. Would anybody make a motion?
This is Phil Moffitt. I'll make the motion.
All right, thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Gail Lively, I'll second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Okay, so next item of business is informational items from Wendy Smith in regard to the American Rescue Plan. And I just want to say, Wendy, again, thank you for helping me last week. And it looks like the ARP plan does promise some really good help for homelessness and for people who are having trouble paying their rent. So you want to talk about that with us, please?
Yes, sir. And I'm going to keep this brief, which I'm sure is good news for everyone on this Zoom. And really, this is early days for us. We don't have a lot of details and a lot of guidance. We don't even know the exact dollar amounts for some of the funding, but we wanted to kind of give you all this big picture because I have already begun meeting with staff and having conversations with partners because this represents an unprecedented amount of funding in my career toward housing stability and homelessness. And we have the opportunity to maybe address some things that aren't just COVID related, but are longstanding issues or longstanding capacity or housing inventory issues. And I'm challenging staff and myself and participating in every webinar I can to try to kind of think big picture about this before we get really weighed down with the urgency of the money and all of the rules that might get attached to it. So my aim is just to give you all kind of this big picture because I know it's going to run my life for a couple of years here at KHC, and it will probably, come back to the board at some point, different iterations of what we're doing with these funds. Just to take one step back before I tell you about the American Rescue Plan, there was legislation passed at the end of December that funded the emergency rental assistance program that we launched February 15th. We have been running that as a continuation of the Healthy at Home Eviction Relief Fund, but it is a second and much larger bucket of funding. Louisville and Lexington are also, they received the same funds and are running very similar programs, identical in terms of how much funding landlords and tenants can get. So that's just to let you know, we just launched that. And now if you go to the next slide, Jeremy, we now have a range of housing provisions in the American Rescue Plan that will affect KHC's work and that of our partners. And so there are funds that will come from Treasury to the Commonwealth. There are funds that will come from HUD directly to KHC. And then there is other funding that benefits many of our partners but won't come to us. So in terms of the funds that come from Treasury to the Commonwealth, let's go ahead and go to the next slide, if you don't mind. You can keep going. So these are funds that will come from Treasury to the Commonwealth and that KHC expects to administer. So one of the funds is the Homeowner Assistance Fund, again, from Treasury to the Commonwealth, likely to be administered by KHC. And this is a minimum of $50 million to each state. We don't know our exact allocation yet. We don't have any details really yet. And the idea is you could help homeowners with their mortgage payments, with their utilities, with insurance and other related housing costs to keep them stably in their mortgage and with their utilities on. There is no maximum income limit in the legislation, but 60% of the funds have to go to homeowners that are at or below median income. And states can do deeper targeting, or cities can, depending on who's using the dollars. These funds are available until September of 2025. So we have a good amount of time to utilize these. It's not quite the rush that some of our other funding has been. And KHC administered a very similar program. We called it the Unemployment Bridge Program. Treasury called it the Hardest Hit Fund. And we utilized a network of nonprofit housing counseling agencies. So we would probably kind of revive the software and the processes and those relationships to see how those would fit in service of this. This is good news because we are getting a lot of requests through our rental assistance program for homeowners, and we can't currently help them. Next slide, please. In addition, there is another bucket of emergency rental assistance coming. We're calling it ERAP 2.0, again, from Treasury to the Commonwealth, likely to be administered by KHC. And it is very similar to our current program. It's rent and utility assistance and other housing stability services. It does have some new flexibilities, and there's a lot more clearly identified funding to fund services like legal aid or other housing stability services. This is an area where I've really challenged my staff, and we've begun talking with partners. We have a lot of funding for our current Healthy at Home eviction relief. We could use this second tranche of funding in a really different and maybe more creative and dispersed way to get housing resources out across the state, because because it's not as hard to use as HUD dollars, not as many strings attached. So it's early days, but we're trying to think really more creatively and strategically about how this second bucket of funding gets utilized. Next slide, please. And just to give you a sense of the magnitude of this, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program from Treasury is the first bucket that was approved at the end of December was almost $300 million. The coming second bucket is almost $235 million for the state. Now that does get broken up between Jefferson County, Fayette County, and then the balance of state. I won't bore you all with the wonky details, but the formula used to determine those amounts disadvantages Jefferson and Fayette counties. I won't go into, I don't know why they decided to do it, but the formula does. And so the state has been talking right now with Jefferson County about giving them additional, some of the state's dollars, because Jefferson County has such an avalanche of evictions occurring, and that could just get worse. And they think they may run out of funds before this second bucket of funds even arrives in their coffers. Okay, and then there are two buckets of funding that's coming straight to KHC. They're programs that we already administer that are getting additional funding. Our Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher, or HCV program, is going to get a allocation of vouchers to address homelessness. So they are special emergency vouchers, not just general vouchers for anyone. And we would have a kind of a different way of getting referrals for those. They're a little bit similar to some mainstream vouchers that we have, and a relatively new partnership between our Section 8 HCV program and my homelessness team and our homelessness partners across the state. But they have built this partnership of referrals. That program is only homeless people who also have a disability. These vouchers will be just for people who are homeless, are at risk, are experiencing domestic violence. And so this is just a great opportunity to get a lot of folks permanently housed. Next slide. And then the second kind of funding that's going to come straight to KHC from HUD is the Home Investment Partnership. This is an unprecedented earmarking of these kind of funds, home dollars, to serve the homeless. Home isn't usually earmarked for any certain kind of population or housing solution. In addition, the funding can cover some uses that we can't normally fund with the home program. We can do rent assistance. We can develop permanent affordable housing. We can also do non-congregate shelter development, which would be like a non-congregate shelter is, it's emergency shelter, but it's not all in one big space. So the idea would be maybe you buy a hotel and you convert it into a shelter facility where people have individual rooms, but they might not have a lease. We can also do more just like single bedroom apartment development to house the homeless or people who are at risk of homelessness. There's also a nice possibility to give significant operating grants to build nonprofit capacity. And we have until 2025 again to use these funds. So yeah, that's great. Next slide. Perfect. So the amount that it looks like we will get through the formula is $52 million and change. And then several other localities will also get funded. There's a consortium in Covington, Northern Kentucky that will get funded, Lexington and Louisville, and then Owensboro will get a little slice of this new home funding. Those are localities that always get home dollars, so that's why they're slated to get another bucket. And then lastly, there's other funding that will benefit Kentuckians and our partners that probably won't touch us directly, but does help us in other ways. Housing counseling agencies are likely to get significant operating funds that will be administered by NeighborWorks. And then rural development, the USDA, through their multifamily programs and their home loans, is getting additional assistance to supplement rent assistance and to help USDA home borrowers to stay in their mortgages and not lose their housing. So that's good news. Even if it doesn't touch us, it's good for Kentucky. And I think there's one last slide, which is just kind of, because I love a table, I just kind of summed up all of these programs and what we are estimating they mean for KHC, not the entire Commonwealth. how much admin, how much time we have to use those funds, just to have a kind of a snapshot of this immense opportunity that we have to help a lot of people during an emergency, but also think about addressing some long-term, long-standing challenges that we've had around homelessness that we just never have enough money to address. And so I keep telling my staff, we're living in the upside down where funding scarcity is not our reason for not being able to get something done, or that will soon not be our reason. So it's going to be a challenge. And that's it. Thank you all very much.
Well, thank you, Wendy. And you've done an excellent job putting those together for us. And Kentucky Housing itself will be able to buy a non-congregate shelter. Is that correct?
It would not be KHC. It would be, we would work with our homelessness partners across the state, our nonprofit developers, maybe even our for-profit developers, to look at, what would they be willing to own and operate. That's going to be the big challenge, is making sure we have the capacity. Getting it built is not the hard part. It's operating it successfully over time. So that's going to be so being able to fund services and operations is going to be a big part of figuring that out. So Mike, we would not own anything. We kind of have a policy that we don't ever want to try to be an owner, but we can help partners finance that. And really, the HUD has said for some of the programs, they're going to waive the funding limits. Usually there's a cap on how much we can put in any one project based on how many units it has. They're going to waive a lot of that stuff. So we may look at just, really going deep with the funding to make sure it can sustain itself over time.
Well, so it would be either in a grant or loan, probably. Is that correct? Yes,
sir. Probably a grant, because homeless folks don't tend to have a lot of money to pay rent. So it probably will be all grants. Yeah. Okay.
So, that's one of the things I hear, that non-congregate housing is needed. That's one of the things I keep hearing that from the people who try to run the homeless program. So that could be a real help. So do any board members have any questions of Wendy and the programs here? Okay, Wendy, thank you so very much.
They do a great job. And you've heard me say that before.
Thanks, Kathy.
All right. So, Mr. Miller, do you have any items that are not on the agenda that you'd like to discuss?
Mr. Chairman, I do not. I think this has been a very productive meeting. I'm very appreciative of the board members, very appreciative of the pension committee and their individual efforts in that. And also, Mr. Chairman, very appreciative of your efforts. You've devoted a substantial amount of time and energy to our efforts over the last several months, and it is greatly appreciated. Your support is invaluable. And again, I don't want to really leave anybody out here at KHC, but thanks to Jim Statler, who's provided enormous leadership to us. Thanks to Amy, who has provided that same type of leadership to us on the personnel side. And I really do appreciate what Wendy and her staff has been doing, not only in their day-to-day things that they're doing, but they're administering this program this last fall on rental assistance. I mean, they stood up a program from scratch, from nothing. They stood it up with temporary workers, and then the management here jumping in and managing the temporary workers to make that program work. And they're about ready to do it again. And so with the new rental dollars, we are expanding the temporary workers that we've got for that, the homeowners assistance programs, the other home dollars that have been mentioned here. So it's a huge undertaking, and not to go unmentioned, Jeremy's support in all of this, providing the legal advice and guidance through all this has been tremendous. So thanks to all of them for making all of this work, and thanks again to the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. And let me echo that. You have a tremendous staff, and I appreciate everybody's hard work, especially the executive management's work on this pension issue. And Jim, I appreciate your financial expertise. I've learned quite a bit myself, so I really appreciate that. And so all of you all at KHC, you all do a wonderful job. Wendy and Amy and Jeremy, you all, and I can't say enough good things about Mr. Miller. So you all keep up the good work down there, and we certainly appreciate it. Does any board member have anything that they would like to bring up at this point?
I would just like to echo everyone's praise of the staff. I've been around a long time, and it is difficult to see or find another staff that is as good and excellent and professional as the KHC staff. Thank you all.
I agree. Thank you. Okay, if there are no other comments or questions, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, I have a first and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.
Thank
Thanks.